For a lot of victims of domestic violence, they often wait too long to seek the help from either law enforcement or legal advice. So joining us today to discuss your rights is family law attorney Jaye Taylor. Thanks for being here today. Let's start with talking about marital relationships and when conflict happens. When and what are the warning signs that something is escalating?
Well, there's every family's a little bit different, but there are a few standard telltale signs that we look for. One of them is when one person, and frankly it's usually the woman, has been really isolated. So there's a cycle of violence that we see where there's a person, usually the man, who is escalating his controlling behavior, wants to cut her off from other people, wants her to feel more dependent upon him, cuts her off from money and resources. It builds and builds. There's a lot of psychological warfare that goes on, and usually it's very demeaning stuff. You're not capable, you're worthless, you're stupid, you're not capable of supporting yourself without me, you'd be on the street, that kind of talk.
It doesn't always start with the physical.
No, usually it doesn't. The physical violence is typically kind of the top of the cycle. Then very often, if a woman stays in that abusive relationship, the guy will come back with flowers and be very sorry that he did it, apologize, and then it slowly starts over again.
So when we're talking about domestic violence, and as you just said, it can often start with the control or the psychological abuse, how does the law actually define what domestic violence is?
Well, it differs a little bit from state to state, but generally it is a situation that occurs between family members or household members. You don't have to be related by blood or marriage, but you do have to be living in the same household. And one person puts the other person in fear of imminent bodily harm or imminent bodily danger, or actually does something to cause bodily harm. And that has to have happened in order to get legal protection. It has to have happened in the last 6 months. So doing something to put another person in fear has to be something you did on purpose. So, I left all the lights out and my husband fell down the stairs. I didn't do that on purpose. So there has to be an element of either reckless behavior or intentional behavior.
When you take a look at the numbers nationally and then here in the Northwest, Oregon and Washington, how prevalent is it?
Well, in Oregon, we're running about 165,000 calls a year to the helplines for domestic violence. Washington reports that 1 in 5 women will report actually being harmed by domestic violence in her lifetime. So it's very prevalent.
And these are just the reported cases and people actually calling for help, taking that step.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So that number could be much larger.
It probably is much larger.
When you look at these families and the spouses having the domestic violence, what's the impact on the children?
Well, for one thing, Oregon tries to protect children, most states do, by saying that if domestic violence occurs in the presence of one of the children, that escalates the event to a potential felony. So it's very serious, and the reason that Oregon does that is because children can be permanently harmed. Studies seem to indicate that boys are twice as likely to abuse their partners in adult life if they watched their mother or their father being abused as a child. Little girls are much more likely to suffer from anxiety and, those kinds of long-term mental health issues.
And rational thought would think that the little boy wouldn't grow into that man to abuse if they witnessed that happening to their mother, but it's the exact opposite.
It's exactly the opposite.
When you talk about domestic violence, we always assume it's the woman being abused. Are there cases when the man is abused? Yeah,
in fact, we think there's probably a lot more domestic violence against men than we realize because men don't want to report this. The truth, however, and there are a lot of cases, I've personally represented a number of men who were attacked by their domestic partner, but the truth is that women are more likely to be seriously injured. Women, in the month of December in 2009, in the state of Oregon alone, 18 people died as a domestic violence, the outcome of domestic violence. 8 of those 18 were men. They were the perpetrators, and they also killed themselves in the same event. So 7 women, Several children and 8 men all died in 1 month in December in Oregon. So, you know, men and women, we're in this together. It's a culmination of a massive breakdown in relationship.
That's
obviously.
an interesting statistic, speaking of just the month of December. Are there times of the year that it tends to escalate more?
Yes, there are, and we used to always think, well, the holidays, everybody has unrealistic expectations about family involvement during the holidays. But the fact is, statistically, the highest month of the year is usually July. So maybe it has to do with the heat, or kids being out of school, or there's something else going on in the month of July. In addition to that, any holiday where there's a lot of alcohol consumption, we'll see a bump in domestic violence. So that would be 4th of July, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day.
What legal options do victims have? Do they need to get an attorney?
They sure do if it's a serious, ongoing domestic violence problem. First thing they have to realize is that there's nothing that a person can do to another person that warrants a physical response. So if a woman is cheating on her husband, or a terrible mom, or a terrible housewife, or whatever his complaints are, he doesn't have a right to strike her. So a lot of women feel that they deserve it, that they're the cause of it, and that's never true. You can't threaten to hurt somebody physically, and you can't hurt them physically. That's illegal. So if that happens, you need to go get help. You can go to victims assistance. Every single county has victims assistance workers who will tell you step by step what to do. You can go down to the courthouse. We have in most counties a family law desk or a domestic violence desk, and there are people standing there who will tell you exactly how to fill out the forms. And they'll tell you if you've got all the factors that you need to go into court and get a restraining order.
Are there any ways that we can improve the laws? Are they working the way they are?
Well, I think the biggest problem is people don't know where to go to get help. People think they have to spend a lot of money. Usually often these victims have been isolated from money. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they're from poor families.
Right.
It means that somebody has cut them off financially. So it's very hard for them to get help. We could do a better job helping those people if we had more, if they had more access to free legal advice and more volunteer lawyers, frankly.
So we'll encourage those lawyers to do those pro bono work. But there is support available. There are resources for people to go to.
Yes, you can also call the police. Police report that the vast majority of their calls, their 911 calls, are domestic violence calls. But you have to understand that it's not enough to say, he told me that his lawyer's meaner than my lawyer, or he's going to take all my money in the divorce. That is not domestic violence. Domestic violence is when it escalates to a threat or actual physical harm, bodily harm. Not sending you to the hospital, but grabbing you, pushing you against a wall, throwing you on the floor, those kinds of things.
And take those moments seriously and turn to help when they happen.
Because it can get a lot worse.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, family law attorney Jaye W. Taylor.
Thank you.